Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the only place where we take a monumental stack of sources, articles, biographies, letters, research papers, and distill them down to the essential, fascinating, and most actionable knowledge just for you.
Today, we are opening the vault on a figure whose political influence was, truly monumental.
Absolutely. Spanning the Great Depression, World War II, the rise of modern media, and the very foundation of global human rights architecture.
We are undertaking a deep dive into the extraordinary life of Anna Eleanor Roosevelt, the longest-serving First Lady of the United States.
And our mission today is to look far beyond the typical, sometimes sanitized portrait of a president's wife.
Exactly. Eleanor Roosevelt didn't just stand by her husband, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. She transformed a traditional, often ceremonial position into an independent, powerful platform for diplomacy and rigorous social activism.
She essentially rewrote the job description of the First Lady.
She really did.
And our source materials, they completely confirm this. This transformation is the central narrative. We've compiled foundational biographical material covering her deeply unhappy early life and complex marriage.
And we have detailed histories of her revolutionary use of media and communications.
Her controversial domestic initiatives during the New Deal, her pivotal civil rights victories that, often put her at odds with her husband.
And, of course, her monumental post-White House work at the United Nations.
And when we discuss her influence, we aren't just talking about domestic policy. We're talking about massive world-changing impact.
Right. She is consistently ranked by historians as the greatest American First Lady. We have to frame her, as the sources suggest, not just as a spouse, but as a groundbreaking political figure, a diplomat.
And the activist President Harry S. Truman himself would later dub the First Lady of the world.
That's it. And the emotional journey from this shy, insecure socialite to a global icon, that's really the core insight of her story.
I think to understand the sheer scale of her public life, we have to start by examining where she came from. Because the political dynamo we know began life in a very dark, emotionally damaging environment.
Okay, let's unpack the beginnings.
Because the first 2 decades of her life, they read almost like a tragedy. Eleanor Roosevelt was born into immense wealth and social privilege. She was a member of both the prominent Roosevelt and Livingston families.
And niece of President Theodore Roosevelt.
Right. But the sources repeatedly describe her childhood as traumatic and, emotionally deprived.
Absolutely. The emotional hardship began at home. Her mother, Anna Rebecca Hall, was frequently described as one of New York's great beauties.
And she was emotionally distant, even cruel toward Eleanor.
That's putting it mildly. Anna allegedly found her daughter plain or ugly and was often ashamed of her serious demeanor.
That's where the nickname Granny came from, isn't it?
Yes, a term her mother used to mock her lack of youthful gaiety and her serious manner as a child.
To have your own mother undermine your self-worth like that, that's a profound injury that must have shaped her intense need for approval and her later drive for social justice.
The sources do link that, indirectly. Biographers suggest that her profound lack of self-confidence and this feeling of being an outsider, despite all her privilege, gave her a unique ability to empathize with the marginalized.
And then her family life was just shattered by devastating loss.
Completely. Her mother and younger brother died suddenly from diphtheria in 1892. And her father, Elliot Roosevelt, who suffered from severe alcoholism, was absent and struggling with his own addiction.
And his death was equally tragic.
It was. Elliot Roosevelt died in 1894 from a seizure following a serious fall, which happened during a fit of delirium tremens.
These rapid early losses were just catastrophic.
They were. And Eleanor confessed in later life that she was prone to depression, and the sources connect this directly to the instability and trauma of her formative years.
There's a poignant detail that really sticks with you. Her alcoholic father had implored her before his death to act as a mother toward her surviving younger brother, Hall.
He asked her to essentially guide him, and she took that responsibility incredibly seriously, honoring that request for the rest of his life.
She even chaperoned him to Groton and wrote him almost daily.
It established a pattern we see repeated throughout her life. When faced with these emotional voids, Eleanor poured herself into duty, into obligation, and care for others, often suppressing her own needs.
But the sources agree that the major turning point, the moment she began to build her own identity and confidence, was when she was shipped off to boarding school.
Allenswood Boarding Academy in London, at age 15.
This was the moment she found a true mentor.
Exactly. The headmistress, Marie Souvestre, was a noted intellectual and enforced a rigorous curriculum designed specifically to cultivate independent thinking and confidence in young women.
Which was revolutionary for the time.
Totally revolutionary. Souvestre took a special interest in Roosevelt, who just thrived there. She gained self-confidence, she became fluent in French.
And the connection with Sylvester was clearly very deep, wasn't it?
Intensely deep. Souvestre was later revealed to be a lesbian, and she cultivated a very advanced political and intellectual environment. Eleanor kept Souvestre's portrait on her desk and carried their letters with her for years after Souvestre's death.
So this period showed her that intellectual rigor and an independent political viewpoint were not only possible for a woman, but essential.
Yes. She returns to the U.S. in 1902, and shortly after, she meets her future husband, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They were fifth cousins once removed.
And this relationship was immediately fraught with family interference.
Right from the start. They became engaged in 1903, but Franklin's powerful and controlling mother, Sarah Ann Delano, staunchly opposed the match.
She even tried to quash the romance by hauling Franklin away on a Caribbean cruise.
But they persisted. The 1905 wedding itself, though, was a massive social event, largely thanks to her uncle.
Yes. President Theodore Roosevelt gave the bride away. He quipped that it was a good thing to keep the name in the family.
But that public celebration hid a private tragedy: the immediate dominance of Sarah Delano. Sarah controlled virtually every aspect of their domestic life.
She even provided them with a townhouse that was connected to her own by sliding doors.
And she ran both households for the first decade of their marriage.
It sounds suffocating. I mean, Eleanor was an adult married woman, yet living under the thumb of a powerful mother-in-law who dictated everything.
It was suffocating. Eleanor later reflected sadly that her 6 children, one of whom died in infancy, were more my mother-in-law's children than they were mine.
And compounding this emotional distance, she felt ill-suited to motherhood.
She did. She confessed to her daughter that sex with Franklin was merely an ordeal to be born, which suggests a deep physical and emotional disconnect right from the early days.
So the marriage was a traditional, if distant, arrangement until 1918. That's when everything changed with the discovery of the affair.
The defining moment. Eleanor discovered love letters from her social secretary, Lucy Mercer, in Franklin's suitcase.
And FDR had been seriously contemplating divorce.
He was, but the sources suggest multiple pressures stopped him. His mother, Sarah, threatened to disinherit him entirely if he divorced.
And his political advisor, Louis Howe, pressured him to stay.
Right, arguing that a divorced politician had no future in America. So the result was a radical transformation of the relationship.
The union ceased to be physically intimate and transformed into a strictly pragmatic political partnership.
Precisely. Eleanor was profoundly disillusioned and devastated, and she channeled that enormous emotional energy into public life and social work, joining the Women's Trade Union League, or WTUL.
And that political pivot was then cemented by Franklin's sudden debilitating illness in 1921.
This was her great opportunity, though born of tragedy. FDR was stricken with a paralytic illness, at the time believed to be polio, while vacationing at Campobello Island.
And Eleanor's role was crucial.
She provided intense nursing care, perhaps saving his life from complications. But more importantly, she fought fiercely against Sarah, who urged Franklin to retire and become a country gentleman.
Because she recognized that if he retired, she would likely be subsumed again by Sarah's control.
That's the key insight. Eleanor successfully persuaded Franklin to stay in politics, arguing that active involvement was essential for his mental and physical recovery. This was a massive turning point.
It gave her the freedom and the necessity to step out of Sarah's shadow and become Franklin's public representative.
A role she took to immediately. So before they ever reached the White House, she was already a seasoned political operator, largely filling the public vacuum left by the incapacitated FDR.
She was a tireless surrogate.
Coached by Louis Howe, she began making public appearances and quickly became a leader in the New York State Democratic Party. She passionately championed the WTUL's core progressive goals,
Advocating for a 48-hour work week for women, establishing a minimum wage,
and pushing for the abolition of child labor. This was her true political education.
Her political ruthlessness during this period is actually quite surprising, especially in her conflict with her own family.
Oh, absolutely. She campaigned hard for Al Smith in 1924 against her first cousin, Theodore Roosevelt Jr.
And she went directly for the jugular.
Employing what she later admitted were dirty trickster's tactics. She dogged her cousin on the campaign trail, using a car topped with a giant papier-mâché bonnet shaped like a teapot that emitted simulated steam.
Which, for you listening, was a direct pointed attack referencing the massive Teapot Dome scandal.
A major bribery scandal involving government oil reserves during the Harding administration, so she was explicitly linking her cousin to the corruption of the prior Republican administration.
And he was furious.
Never forgave her. It led to a public, painful break with that side of the family. And though she later decried the methods, they were effective. Theodore lost the race. It showed her immense capacity for political combat.
And she didn't just campaign. She also tested her ideas for community and labor revitalization with the Valkill community experiment.
In 1927, she established Valkill Industries with several friends. The core idea was to create reliable winter income for local farming families through traditional handicrafts.
Specifically, high-quality reproduction furniture, pewter, and homespun cloth.
Right, leveraging the popularity of the colonial revival style at the time.
This sounds very much like a blueprint for the kind of self-help, community-focused projects we'd see later in the New Deal.
It was an important precursor. While it never achieved the ambitious subsistence goals she imagined, it absolutely demonstrated her commitment to using craft and community to provide meaningful work rather than just direct charity.
And Valkill later became the only home she ever personally owned.
A vital distinction from the grand family estates she merely inhabited. It symbolized her independence, born out of this pre-White House political and social engagement.
So when Franklin was inaugurated in 1933, Eleanor became First Lady. But the sources make it clear she was initially depressed, even terrified, about assuming the role. Why?
Well, the role of the First Lady, up until that point, was strictly constrained to hostessing, domestic charity, and ceremonial duties.
Her immediate predecessor, Lou Henry Hoover, had been an accomplished geologist and activist, but she had actively stopped her feminist activities upon entering the White House.
Right. Eleanor's distress was real. She reportedly told a friend that she did not want to be confined to being merely a backdrop for Bertie, meaning a non-speaking, pleasant accessory.
So she used the full moral and political weight of the presidency, with Franklin's active backing, to essentially redefine the position from the ground up.
She absolutely did. She made the position an independent platform for activism, and as a result, she became known as the most controversial First Lady in United States history.
She immediately adopted an active speaking and writing agenda,
which few married women did professionally at the time, let alone a First Lady. And she immediately monetized her position, which was a risky move.
but she did it in a unique way.
She did it for a purpose, not for personal wealth. In her first year alone, she earned $75,000 from lectures and writing, donating the vast majority of that income directly to charity.
By 1941, she was able to command lecture fees of $1,000 per engagement.
A staggering sum at the time, all of which went to organizations she supported.
Her transformation of the First Lady role is inextricably linked to her revolutionary mastery of media. She truly was a pioneer.
She was unprecedented in her approach. She became the first presidential spouse to hold regular press conferences, scheduling 348 of them over her 12 years in the White House.
But the brilliant strategic move was in her initial rule. She barred male reporters from attending these conferences.
That seems like an odd move to exclude the majority of the working press. But what was the goal?
It was a direct maneuver to force the male-dominated newspapers, who were required to cover the First Lady, to hire female staff in order to gain access.
This single decision immediately expanded professional opportunities for women journalists during a time when their access to the White House was extremely limited.
And that wasn't her only media event either. She went head-to-head with the journalism establishment itself.
She did. Since the powerful journalist organization, the Gridiron Club, banned women from its annual dinner, she hosted the famous Gridiron Widows event at the White House.
A highly publicized, successful counter-event that further highlighted her disdain for exclusionary practices.
Beyond press conferences, she created a vast personal media empire that connected directly with millions of Americans, starting with her syndicated column.
My Day. She wrote that column 6 days a week from 1936 until her death in 1962.
An incredible span. It discussed her daily activities, travel, and most importantly, her humanitarian concerns. She also contributed a monthly column to Women's Home Companion and an advice column called If You Ask Me.
Why did she invest so much time and effort into these columns? Was it purely political?
I think biographers argue these publications, which invited reader responses and extensively covered women's issues and domestic dilemmas, were a conscious, sophisticated attempt to use journalism to overcome social isolation for women.
She was creating a two-way channel of communication, making the White House feel accessible.
and fostering a sense of community among her readership. Then there was radio, where she was an early adopter and a huge commercial success.
She hosted a regular radio program of commentary and discussions starting in 1934.
Covering a range of topics, from movie censorship and children's education to the challenges faced by ordinary families. And as with her lectures, she always donated her salary from these broadcasts directly to charity.
But the commercial aspect of her radio appearances caused intense political blowback, didn't it? She was reading ads for mattresses and shoes.
It certainly did. She read commercials for products like a mattress company and the Selby Shoe Company. The controversy peaked because when Selby sponsored her series, their sales reportedly increased by 200%.
So critics, primarily conservative political opponents, seized on this, calling it profiteering.
And questioning the sincerity of her charity donations.
So how did she navigate that criticism?
Her personal popularity and the undeniable charitable destinations of the funds were her shields. The shows were so popular that the criticism largely failed to stick.
Proving she understood how to leverage her fame for financial good, even if it ruffled political feathers.
And she was also a genuine trailblazer in the new mediums of film and television, making over 200 appearances during her life.
She was remarkably media savvy, constantly adapting. She started with writing articles for fan magazines like Modern Screen in 1932.
Offering movie recommendations, her film debut was in 1940, narrating the prologue for the anti-Nazi film Pastor Hall.
She even tried screenwriting.
She did, producing the script for an Oscar-nominated civil defense short, Women in Defense, narrated by Katharine Hepburn, and she embraced the small screen immediately after the war.
Her debut was on VE Day in 1945.
5 years later, in 1950, she became the first woman to host a major American public affairs broadcast TV show, Today with Mrs. Roosevelt on NBC.
The premier guests included Albert Einstein in his first television appearance and J. Robert Oppenheimer.
That is incredible. She's essentially running a talk show with the world's most brilliant minds while also keeping her syndicated column going.
It speaks to her ceaseless energy and her commitment to public discourse. She knew that in the post-war world, information was delivered instantly, and she had to be a part of that conversation.
Which is why we see her making appearances on shows like What's My Line as the mystery guest to promote United Nations Day.
She was willing to use pop culture to push serious political and humanitarian causes.
And sometimes her political support through television could be crucial. Biographers note that her highly visible televised support of John F. Kennedy, despite her initial reservations about his politics, may have provided the necessary nudge for his hairline victory in the 1960 election.
She even lent her name for commercial endorsements, like for Good Luck Margarine.
Where she used the paid slot to raise awareness about world hunger, ensuring every platform served an advocacy purpose.
Let's transition now to two of her most controversial domestic projects during the New Deal era, starting with Arthurdale in West Virginia. This was her deeply personal project.
It was her chief project, born out of deep personal conviction. She visited impoverished, blacklisted, unemployed miners in 1933 and was determined to create a solution.
So Arthurdale was an experimental planned community that she poured much of her personal income into.
Hoping it would be a model for better cared for workers who could achieve self-sufficiency through farming and handicrafts.
But it was a spectacular failure in its early execution, right?
An operational disaster initially. The initial prefabricated houses failed entirely, forcing a rapid rebuild in 1934 to her specifications.
The new houses were built with every modern convenience, including indoor plumbing and steam heat.
But the project faced relentless criticism. Conservatives condemned it as a communist plot due to its government planning.
While even members of the administration, like Secretary of the Interior Harold Ickes, criticized the incredibly high per-family cost.
And this project, meant to be a beacon of progressive reform, quickly ran into the harsh reality of segregation.
It did. Though Roosevelt initially hoped for a racially mixed community, the white miners who formed the core of the community insisted on limiting membership exclusively to white Christians.
And she lost the community vote. However, this failure became a catalyst for her. It motivated her to become much more outspoken on racial discrimination.
And to urge the creation of similar parallel communities for excluded Black and Jewish miners.
Right. So even though the government sold off its holdings at a loss by 1941, Roosevelt still viewed it as a success on a human level.
That's the distinction she drew. She viewed success not purely on the balance sheet, but on the visible, tangible improvements in the residents' lives.
The fact that they had steam heat, indoor plumbing, and community cohesion, For her, the social dividend outweighed the financial loss.
Her work with young people also ignited significant political fire, especially concerning the American Youth Congress, or AYC.
Roosevelt was an urgent advocate for youth during the Depression, stating her terror at the idea that America might be losing this generation to despair and unemployment.
This led directly to the creation of the National Youth Administration, the NYA, in 1935.
A massive New Deal mechanism that provided work and education for Americans aged 16 to 25.
But the AYC, which was a lobbying group for youth interests, was politically tainted in the eyes of many conservatives.
Yes, the controversy arose because the AYC had leaders who were known members of the Young Communist League. In the context of the late 1930s, when political polarization was intense and fear of communism was rising, this affiliation was dangerous for the White House.
And her response wasn't to back away, but to embrace them.
She invited subpoenaed AYC leaders to stay at the White House, including Joseph P. Lash, which predictably fueled conservative criticism and accusations of coddling communists.
The press and political opposition had a field day.
It escalated when AYC members later picketed the White House, even booing Franklin when he addressed and admonished them.
But despite the immense political heat, she remained their champion.
She endured it. She was willing to risk major political standing to support groups she felt deserved advocacy and who were pushing for necessary reforms, regardless of their unpopular affiliations.
Her advocacy for civil rights is truly where Eleanor Roosevelt earned her unique place in history, largely because she was willing to go further and move faster than her own husband.
Historians generally agree she was significantly more advanced than FDR on racial issues. She served as the absolutely critical connection between the White House and the African-American community during the Jim Crow era.
Often acting as the eyes and ears for her husband, who was politically constrained.
And she didn't rely on reports. She observed the discrimination firsthand during her extensive travels.
That's right. She traveled widely, including through the segregated South, observing discrimination and noting that African Americans received a disproportionately small share of relief money from the New Deal programs.
So she insisted, often loudly, that New Deal benefits be extended equally to all races.
And she broke protocol constantly within the White House itself.
She shattered tradition by consistently inviting hundreds of African-American guests to the White House for dinners and receptions, a practice unheard of at the time.
The most famous incident demonstrating her willingness to publicly break with the segregated establishment was the Marian Anderson concert in 1939.
When the Daughters of the American Revolution, the DS, denied the black opera singer Marian Anderson use of their Constitution Hall because of segregationist rules.
Eleanor immediately, publicly and dramatically resigned from the DR in protest.
And then used her influence to help arrange for Anderson to perform instead on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial.
That concert, attended by 75,000 people and broadcast internationally, was a monumental act of political visibility and symbolism.
It was a defining moment in the modern civil rights movement. But it's fascinating and important for historical context that not everyone saw it as enough.
The sources show Zora Neale Hurston criticized her for not also denouncing the D.C. Board of Education for denying Anderson the auditorium at the all-white Central High School.
Right, noting that the D.C. Board was controlled by congressional committees, largely Democrats, who were screaming so loudly against the DR.
Hurston's critique highlights the immense pressure activists face to address the underlying systemic issues, not just the visible symptoms.
Exactly. But Roosevelt continued to push the boundaries in her own way, often through personal symbolism, such as her friendship with Mary McLeod Bethune.
The African-American educator she appointed as director of the Division of Negro Affairs of the NYA.
And how does she manage the pervasive segregationist attitudes of the White House staff? It was a constant battle.
Roosevelt developed a powerfully simple tactic. Whenever Bethune visited, Eleanor would meet her at the White House gate, openly embrace her, and walk in arm in arm.
This public display made the staff's compliance with non-discrimination undeniable and was a powerful, silent protest.
Despite her efforts, she could not move Franklin on the most difficult piece of legislation, the anti-lynching bill.
This is where political reality clashed hardest with her moral compass. She lobbied intensely behind the scenes for the Costigan-Wagner bill, which would have made lynching a federal crime.
She even arranged a meeting between FDR and NAACP President Walter Francis White.
However, Franklin refused to provide public support, fearing the loss of crucial Southern congressional votes.
And for you listening, that Southern vote was so crucial because the New Deal depended entirely on Southern Democratic chairmen in Congress.
They held the power to block or pass nearly all of FDR's broader economic and social agenda.
Taking a stand on civil rights was considered an existential political threat to the entire New Deal coalition.
So FDR chose legislative progress over moral certainty on this issue, leading the anti-lynching bill to fail repeatedly in the Senate.
And as a direct consequence of her support, Eleanor became a deeply unpopular, even reviled figure across the segregated South.
Oh, absolutely. The opposition was intense and often irrational. Baseless rumors spread through the South about mythical Eleanor Club servants supposedly organizing to oppose their employers.
And Eleanor Tuesdays, suggesting that black men would attack white women on the street.
She was blamed for everything, including the Detroit race riots in 1943, yet her immense popularity among African Americans was real and lasting.
It helped shift the black vote from a reliable Republican bloc to a cornerstone of the Democratic Party.
Moving to wartime, her conscience also placed her in opposition to one of the most disgraceful decisions of FDR's presidency, the Japanese-American internment.
She was a crucial voice of dissent. She privately opposed Executive Order 9066, warning against the great hysteria against minority groups that fueled the internment.
This stance was extremely unpopular even during the war. For her opposition, she was widely criticized, with the powerful Los Angeles Times calling for her forced retirement from public life.
Which demonstrated a clear, consistent separation between her moral standards and her husband's political expediency.
During World War II, her primary role shifted to becoming a vital morale booster, both domestically and internationally.
Initially, she co-chaired the Office of Civilian Defense, the OCD, in 1941, working to expand civilian volunteer roles.
She saw the OCD not just as defense preparation, but as an opportunity to address broader social problems. However, controversy followed her. She was forced to resign after criticism arose over high salaries paid to friends she had appointed.
But her trips to visit the troops were legendary for their impact on morale.
They were truly grueling. She toured England, sometimes under threat of bombing, and then undertook a famously extensive and physically challenging trip through the South Pacific in 1943.
Visiting hospitals, remote bases, and frontline troops.
Admiral William Halsey Jr., one of the war's most prominent commanders, later stated that her Pacific tour alone accomplished more good than any other person who passed through his area.
I think we need to linger on the political tension of that trip. She was a morale booster, but she also saw the carnage of war up close.
She was deeply shaken by the experience, which hardened her post-war views. At the same time, congressional Republicans criticized her severely, accusing her of using scarce wartime resources for unnecessary travel.
So she couldn't escape controversy, even when performing a task vital for military morale.
Her support for the Tuskegee Airmen also serves as a crucial civil rights moment during the war.
It was very public endorsement of the first black combat pilots. In 1941, she visited the Tuskegee Air Corps Advanced Flying School.
And, significantly, took a half-hour flight with C. Alfred Chief Anderson, the chief civilian instructor, cheerfully declaring, "Well, you can fly all right."
This event was widely reported and highly influential, even leading her to help secure a large loan from the Julius Rosenwald Fund to finance Moton Field.
And despite all her wartime efforts, what did she eventually identify as her deepest regret from the war years?
It was her inability to force Franklin to accept more refugees from Nazism. She was haunted by the knowledge that many could have been saved.
She did manage one key victory. She successfully secured refugee status for 83 Jewish refugees aboard the SS Kwanzaa in August 1940.
But she was refused on many other occasions due to intense political pressure and fears of fifth columnists entering the country.
Her son James confirmed this was her deepest regret at the end of her life.
Following the war, her hardened views on Germany led her to support a controversial post-war policy.
She strongly backed the controversial Morgenthau Plan, which, for those who may not recall, aimed to deindustrialize Germany after the war,
essentially converting it into an agrarian, non-industrial state.
And Roosevelt supported this because she deeply feared the resurrection of Germany's political and military power, believing that only through total economic disarmament could long-term peace be secured.
This brings us to the deeply complex, often debated aspects of her personal life and relationships, which were running parallel to her intense political career. Let's start with Lorena Hickok.
Loretta Hickok, or Hick, was an Associated Press reporter assigned to cover her during the 1932 campaign. According to sources, Hickok quickly fell madly in love with her.
They had an intensely close emotional relationship. Hickok eventually resigned her AP post to be near ER, moving into the White House for a brief period.
And the letters they exchanged are the subject of significant scholarly debate.
They are voluminous daily, often 10 to 15-page letters filled with endearments. ER wrote phrases like, "I want to put my arms around you and kiss you at the corner of your mouth."
She even wore a sapphire ring Hickok had given her to Franklin's inauguration.
So what is the prevailing scholarly conclusion regarding the intimacy of this bond?
The debate remains lively. Some biographers conclude the relationship was definitively erotic and romantically involved, citing the emotional intensity and the length of the correspondence.
However, Hickok's own biographer argued that the language was likely an unusually belated schoolgirl crush, cautioning against modern interpretation of 1930s female emotional language.
So we can't definitively label the physical nature, but we can confirm the emotional support was undeniable.
Absolutely. The deep emotional bond and mutual support provided Eleanor with the comfort and closeness that was absent in her political marriage.
And there was another key romantic figure, her bodyguard, Earl Miller.
Earl Miller was a New York State police sergeant, 12 years her junior, assigned as her bodyguard starting in 1929. Biographers describe their relationship as close and romantic,
Calling it her first romantic involvement in her middle years, filling another void left by the affair with Lucy Mercer. Miller taught her various sports and outdoor skills.
They were in contact for decades, correct?
They corresponded daily until her death, which speaks to a profound connection. But here's the mystery. All those letters have been lost.
The rumor is that they were either purchased and destroyed by unknown parties after her death or simply locked away by her family.
And this romantic friendship coincided with FDR's long-term rumored relationship with his secretary, Marguerite Missy LeHand, demonstrating just how much their marriage had dissolved into a pragmatic, platonic political alliance.
Finally, we must discuss her complex and extremely uncomfortable evolution regarding Jewish people, which seems to track directly with her rising political awareness.
Her journey here is one of profound transformation, illustrating the deeply ingrained societal prejudices of the early 20th century. Until middle age, ER exhibited anti-Semitic tendencies.
For example, in a 1918 letter, she described a social gathering, chillingly, as the Jew party was appalling. I never wish to hear money, jewels, or sables mentioned again.
She also, at the Todhunter School, where she was co-owner, explicitly limited the number of Jewish students.
So how did she go from that casual prejudice to becoming a vocal anti-racist and Zionist advocate?
Her political life forced the change. By 1929, her social circle began to include powerful, prominent Jewish political figures like Bernard Baruch and Henry Morgenthau Jr., forcing direct engagement.
Once she became First Lady, she began speaking out publicly against rising anti-Semitism, both in Europe and the U.S.
And she was a key advocate for Jewish refugees. After World War II, she became a staunch champion of Israel, admiring its perceived commitment to New Deal values and pioneering social democracy. It was a clear political and moral realignment.
The end of Franklin's life in April 1945 was in many ways the prelude to Eleanor's true global career. But it began with a final, painful domestic revelation.
A revelation that shattered her final illusions about her marriage. It was twofold and incredibly bitter.
She was profoundly shocked to learn that Franklin's mistress, Lucy Mercer Rutherford, had been with him when he died.
And adding to that bitterness was the discovery that her own daughter, Anna, had known and helped conceal the ongoing relationship for years.
This betrayal, coupled with grief, must have been overwhelming.
But she dealt with the tragedy and immediately channeled her energy back into public service, focusing on legacy and relocation.
She focused on logistics, dedicating the family estate Hyde Park to the federal government as a museum in 1946.
This act set the crucial precedent for the modern system of presidential libraries. She then moved to New York City, eventually residing at 55 East 74th Street while maintaining Val Kill,
The only home she ever personally owned.
And within months of his death, she transitioned from First Lady to global diplomat thanks to President Truman.
Truman recognized her global stature and her diplomatic skills. In December 1945, he appointed her as a delegate to the UN General Assembly.
She went on to serve as the first chair of the Preliminary and Permanent UN Commission on Human Rights from 1946 to 1952.
She was immediately recognized for her incredible ability to synthesize diverse views and manage complex international negotiation, despite initially being doubted by many male colleagues.
And she oversaw the drafting of what is arguably the most important document of the modern human rights era, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or UDHR.
This stands as her crowning achievement, her enduring global legacy, Working alongside figures like Rene Cassin and John Peters Humphrey, she played an instrumental role in shaping the text.
Her skill was in moving from general principles to specific implementable articles and finding consensus among nations with radically different political systems.
What were some of the biggest challenges in drafting the UDHR? You had nations coming out of a devastating world war, the beginnings of the Cold War.
And vast colonial differences. The philosophical differences were immense. Western nations emphasized civil and political rights, freedom of speech, religion.
While Soviet bloc nations prioritized economic and social rights, the right to work, the right to housing.
Her brilliance was acting as the synthesizer, ensuring that the final document was not just a treaty but a globally agreed-upon standard that bridged these ideological divides by including both sets of rights.
The UDHR was adopted on December 10, 1948, receiving a standing ovation. She called it the International Magna Carta of all men everywhere.
It was a monumental victory for diplomacy, and it's crucial to understand why she saw it that way. The UDHR established for the first time a universal benchmark against which a country's treatment of its own people could be judged internationally.
It shifted human rights from being a purely domestic issue to a global concern.
There were 8 abstentions from the vote, though. 6 Soviet bloc countries abstained, primarily due to Article 13, which guaranteed the right of citizens to leave their country.
Roosevelt correctly attributed their abstention to their fear of legitimizing emigration from the Soviet system.
South Africa, operating under apartheid, abstained because the declaration fundamentally contradicted its policy of racial discrimination.
And Saudi Arabia abstained due to concerns that articles concerning marriage and religious conversion conflicted with Islamic law.
But her success with the UDHR cemented her reputation, leading President Truman to call her the First Lady of the World.
A title that truly captured her transition from domestic policy reformer to global architect.
That title was earned. Her UN work extended far beyond the declaration. She consistently pushed for organizations focused on global needs, particularly concerning poverty and hunger.
Like the creation of the Food and Agriculture Organization.
Exactly. She was an early supporter of establishing a UN agency focused on food and nutrition, following a crucial memorandum on freedom from want of food by an Australian nutritionist, Frederick McDougall.
She arranged a meeting between McDougall and FDR, which laid the groundwork for the creation of the FAO in 1945.
Later, in 1960, she pushed the UN to create the Food from Hunger campaign, mobilizing NGOs against global malnutrition.
Even after leaving the White House, she remained fiercely engaged in American partisan politics, particularly in her home state of New York.
She became a key figure in trying to dismantle the old political machine structure. She grew disgusted with Tammany Hall boss Carmine DeSapio after he engineered the defeat of her son, Franklin Jr.
For listeners unfamiliar, Tammany Hall was the notorious political machine that had controlled New York City politics for over a century, relying on patronage and often corruption.
And she took him on directly. She joined friends like Herbert Lehman to form the New York Committee for Democratic Voters, dedicated to opposing DeSapio and the machine's power.
And this long-running, bitter political battle eventually succeeded, forcing DeSapio out of power in 1961.
She maintained her influence in presidential politics, even though she resigned from her UN post when Republican Dwight Eisenhower was elected in 1953.
She supported Adlai Stevenson in both 1952 and 1956. When John F. Kennedy ran in 1960, she had significant reservations about him.
Primarily due to his past failure to unequivocally condemn McCarthyism, which she found morally reprehensible, yet she ultimately supported him.
And Kennedy recognized her continued global stature, reappointing her to the UN and the National Advisory Committee of the Peace Corps in 1961.
I want to revisit her long-standing, complicated opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment, or ERA.
She had historically opposed the ERA because she feared it would erase decades of legal protections achieved for women workers through unionization and progressive legislation.
Her worry was that one constitutional amendment could undo all that protective legislation, but her view shifted later in life.
It did. By the 1950s, she stopped publicly criticizing it. And in the early 1960s, she conceded that due to the increased strength of unionization and changes in the workforce, the ERA might no longer pose the existential threat it once did.
Her final public position was chairing the Presidential Commission on the Status of Women, appointed by JFK in 1961.
And that commission's conclusion was a very careful compromise.
Yes. The final report, issued after her death, concluded that equality for women was best achieved by recognizing gender differences and needs and by pursuing legal reforms state by state, rather than through the sweeping language of the ERA.
It reflected the ongoing tension within feminism between those seeking uniform constitutional equality and those prioritizing legislative protections for specific groups.
And one of her last diplomatic missions demonstrates the sheer level of global trust placed in her.
After the disastrous 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, JFK asked her, along with labor leader Walter Reuther and Milton S. Eisenhower, to undertake the incredibly sensitive task of negotiating the release of captured Americans with Cuban leader Fidel Castro.
This speaks volumes about her nonpartisan global credibility and the belief that she, perhaps more than any official diplomat, could connect with a challenging counterpart.
Eleanor Roosevelt remained incredibly active well into her late 70s, averaging 150 lectures a year throughout the 1950s. She seemed tireless. How did her final years unfold?
Her tremendous energy finally began to wane in 1960 when she was diagnosed with aplastic anemia. Unfortunately, 2 years later, in 1962, the treatment she received for that condition activated a dormant case of tuberculosis in her bone marrow.
She died on November 7, 1962, at the age of 78, from resulting cardiac failure, cared for by her daughter Anna in her Manhattan home.
The national and international response to her death was massive. It showed the respect she had commanded globally.
President Kennedy ordered all U.S. flags lowered to half-staff throughout the world.
She was interred next to Franklin in the Rose Garden at Springwood Estate in Hyde Park, with JFK, Lyndon B. Johnson, and former Presidents Truman and Eisenhower all in attendance.
She received the UN Human Rights Prize posthumously in 1968.
And was named the most admired woman by Gallup 13 times between 1948 and 1961, which is truly unparalleled.
Her recognition and legacy have only grown since her death, cementing her status in the American political firmament.
She holds several unique honors that speak to her singular status. The Eleanor Roosevelt National Historic Site, Val Kill, is the only residence she ever personally owned, a monument to her independence.
Uniquely, the Franklin D. Roosevelt Memorial in National Mall is the only U.S. presidential memorial that explicitly depicts a First Lady.
Her bronze statue is displayed prominently with a UN seal, specifically honoring her post-White House achievements.
And what does the consistent historical consensus say about her role?
It is remarkably consistent. The Siena College Research Institute conducts periodic surveys asking historians to assess First Ladies on metrics like intelligence, courage, accomplishments, and leadership.
In every one of those surveys since they began in 1982, Eleanor Roosevelt has been consistently ranked as the greatest American First Lady.
She dominates those rankings across all criteria. She topped 9 out of 10 criteria in the 2003 survey and 8 out of 10 in 2008.
Historians also ranked her and Franklin as the highest power couple in presidential history.
And she was consistently cited as the greatest 20th and 21st century First Lady in categories like advancing women's issues, being a political asset, public service after leaving office, and, crucially, for creating a lasting global legacy.
What an incredible trajectory we've traced. Eleanor Roosevelt was a figure shaped by profound early tragedy, an ugly duckling struggling with loss and insecurity, who navigated a shattered marriage that she converted into a foundational political partnership.
She became a groundbreaking First Lady who literally used every available media platform, print, radio, television, to force the expansion of American democracy, fighting for civil rights and New Deal ideals.
And she didn't stop there, going on after her husband's death to quietly but forcefully draft the moral foundation for global human rights.
Eleanor Roosevelt's legacy is the definitive proof that the role of a political spouse could be leveraged far beyond mere hostessing. She was a singular force who demonstrated that influence could be wielded both domestically through her aggressive, often controversial advocacy, and internationally, defining the moral architecture of the post-war world.
She created an enduring global legacy that vastly surpassed the expectations and limitations of her time.
Absolutely.
The ultimate takeaway for me, and the final question I want to leave you with as you reflect on her life, is about the nature of true political courage. Eleanor Roosevelt was constantly willing to publicly align herself with and advocate for deeply unpopular groups.
Whether they were youth communists, marginalized African Americans fighting for basic dignity, or Jewish refugees fleeing Nazism.
And she often did so even when it put her directly at odds with her husband, the press, the public, and even her own family. What is the true value of that kind of unwavering political courage when it means risking the popular political standing of your closest ally, the President of the United States?
She lived with that tension, that necessity of moral protest versus political pragmatism, her entire public life.
A phenomenal question. It forces us to consider whether standing firm on principle, even if unpopular, creates a deeper, more lasting political impact than achieving immediate legislative wins through silent compromise.
Exactly.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the extraordinary life of Eleanor Roosevelt. See you next time.